Did Jesus rise from the dead? And how can we be confident in saying that he rose from the dead? And how do we know that it's not just make believe? I mean, last I checked, people don't rise from the dead every day. And in fact, that never happens. So, how and why should we trust the Bible when it says that Jesus rose from the dead? Well, I think there's a couple of facts that we need to explain. Okay, so stick with me. We've got Christianity Part 1, where there's this guy named Jesus who gathers some disciples, does some teaching in a couple of temples. He is not a king, he has no political power or anything. Then over here, we have Christianity Part 3, where there's this huge eruption of Christianity that takes over the Roman Empire, which was the biggest empire the world had ever seen, and it outlasted. Now, in the middle, for Christianity Part 2, all that we have is Jesus' death. How do you explain getting from Part 1 to Part 3? There's one more thing to add, and that is hundreds of people claim to have seen the risen Jesus with their own eyes. Documented historical fact. Now, just because they said it doesn't automatically make it true. But many of these people, including Jesus' disciples, went to their own deaths by claiming that Jesus was the risen king. That went against the Roman system, whose king was Caesar. It went against the Jewish religious system. And so, some of you guys are probably going to be asking, hang on a second, John, don't people from other religions also die for their beliefs? And I would say yes, but there's a key difference here. See, the people who were eyewitnesses to Jesus didn't hear about the resurrection secondhand and trust it. They saw it with their own eyes, and so they knew what really went down. You see, people will often die for what they believe in, but not many people will die for something that they know is a lie. In the Bible, the Apostle Paul writes a letter to a church at a place called Corinth. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 to 11, if you want to look it up later. But in it, Paul says the gospel. Basically, Jesus died for our sins, rose back from the dead 3 days later, but he includes this other part. He says that hundreds of other believers also saw the resurrected Jesus. As if to say, look guys, if you don't believe me, heaps of other people saw it, go and ask them. So, we need to ask ourselves, why did Paul include this bit in his letter if it didn't happen? It could easily be debunked. So, what's the best way to explain this huge growth of Christianity that followed? Because at this time in the first century, the church had no power. It was persecuted. I think the best way to explain this eruption of Christianity is that Jesus did rise from the dead.